Crew takes white passenger side against black CEO 5 minutes later, the lawsuit hits. Hello everyone, before we begin today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel is losing traction and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us. It's quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this channel growing collectively. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's get back to the story. The cabin of Flight 247 from New York to Los Angeles was supposed to be quiet. Soft engine hum, muted conversations, the gentle clink of glass as a flight attendant poured sparkling water for a passenger in first class. But that calm shattered in a single sentence. "Sir, you need to move. That seat isn't yours." The words cut through the cabin like a blade. Heads turned instantly. Standing in the aisle was a blonde flight attendant in a crisp yellow uniform, her posture stiff, her voice louder than it needed to be. Her hand pointed directly at the man seated by the window in seat 2A. The man she was addressing looked up slowly. Marcus Carter, 38 years old. Dark burgundy suit. Calm expression. One hand resting on a brown leather briefcase. He had been on the phone moments earlier, speaking quietly, businesslike, as if nothing in the world could disturb his focus. Now the entire first-class cabin was staring at him. Marcus didn't move. Beside the flight attendant stood an older white businessman in an expensive navy suit. Silver hair. Sharp jawline. Arms folded across his chest like a judge who had already made his decision. He let out a short laugh. "I told you," the man said to the attendant. "He's in the wrong seat." A few passengers shifted uncomfortably. Across the aisle, someone slowly raised a phone, pretending to check messages while the camera lens pointed forward. The flight attendant stepped closer. "Sir," she repeated, louder now, "that seat belongs to this passenger."
She gestured toward the older man beside her.
The businessman nodded smugly. "That's my seat," he said. "I paid for it." Marcus glanced once at the seat number on the wall beside him. 2A. Then he looked back at the attendant. His voice was quiet. "Check the system." It wasn't a challenge. It wasn't anger. Just a simple instruction. But the attendant didn't check anything. Instead, her eyes scanned him quickly, the suit, the briefcase, the absence of designer luggage or flashy jewelry. Her expression hardened. "Sir, this is first class?" she said. The implication hung in the air. The older businessman smirked. "You people always try this trick," he muttered. A few passengers gasped softly. Marcus didn't react. Not to the comment. Not to the tension spreading through the cabin like static. Outside the window, the runway lights stretched into the distance. Inside the plane, the temperature of the room had changed completely. The attendant crossed her arms. "This is your final warning," she said. "If you don't move, we'll have to remove you from the aircraft." For the first time, Marcus slowly closed the phone call he had been on. He placed the device calmly on top of his briefcase. Then he looked up at her. Really looked. The kind of look that made people pause without understanding why. But the attendant didn't pause. Behind her, the businessman leaned closer to the aisle, already preparing to take the seat. Several passengers were now openly filming. The quiet first-class cabin had turned into something else entirely. A courtroom without a judge. Marcus leaned back slightly in the seat. Still calm. Still silent. And completely unmoved. None of them knew it yet. Not the flight attendant. Not the smug passenger beside her. Not even the people recording on their phones. But the man they were trying to remove from seat 2A was one of the largest shareholders of the airline they were about to take off with. And in exactly 5 minutes, this plane wasn't going anywhere. The tension inside the first-class cabin didn't fade after the confrontation. It thickened, like pressure building quietly before a storm. Marcus Carter remained seated in 2A, his posture relaxed, one arm resting lightly on the leather armrest as if the entire situation unfolding around him had nothing to do with him. But everyone in the cabin knew it did. Across the aisle, a woman in a gray business suit slowly tilted her phone upward, pretending to scroll while the camera recorded everything happening in the row ahead. 2 seats behind Marcus, a young man leaned forward, slightly whispering to the passenger beside him. Did he actually steal the seat? The whisper traveled quickly. The older businessman standing beside the flight attendant heard it and smiled. Not a friendly smile. The kind of smile someone gives when they believe they've already won. Look, he said, raising his voice just enough for nearby passengers to hear. I've been flying first class for 20 years. People try this all the time. His gaze slid toward Marcus. Some folks think if they just sit down confidently enough, no one will question it. A few passengers shifted uncomfortably. The flight attendant nodded in agreement, clearly reassured by the confidence of the well-dressed man standing beside her. Sir? She said again to Marcus, her tone sharper now. We really need you to move so this passenger can take his seat. Marcus didn't respond immediately. Instead, he glanced once toward the cabin window beside him. Outside, the runway lights stretched across the dark tarmac like a string of distant stars. The aircraft hadn't pushed back from the gate yet. There was still time before departure. Time for mistakes. He turned his attention back to the attendant. I already told you, Marcus said quietly. Check the system. The attendant exhaled slowly, clearly irritated now. I don't need the system to tell me whose seat this is, she replied. The older businessman chuckled under his breath. You hear that, he said, gesturing lightly toward Marcus, still trying to bluff. Behind them, another passenger raised his phone a little higher. The red recording light glowed faintly. At the rear of the first-class cabin, a younger flight attendant stood near the galley curtain watching the entire exchange unfold. Her name tag read, Maya. Unlike the others, she wasn't smiling. She wasn't nodding along. She was frowning. Because just minutes earlier, while scanning boarding passes during pre-boarding, she had seen something very clearly on her handheld device.
Seat 2A.
Confirmed. Passenger name, Marcus Carter. Her eyes moved from the seat number to the man still sitting there calmly to the senior flight attendant now demanding he leave. Something wasn't right. Maya took one hesitant step forward. Lisa, she said carefully. The senior attendant turned slightly. Maya lowered her voice. I think we should just check the manifest. Lisa shook her head almost instantly. No need, deed. But Maya didn't step back. Because she remembered something else too. When Marcus had boarded earlier, the scanner had flashed green immediately. Not yellow. Not red. Green. Which meant the system had already verified everything. Yet, somehow, the entire cabin was now treating him like a trespasser. Up front, the older businessman was already loosening his jacket, preparing to sit down. His leather briefcase rested halfway on the armrest of seat 2A, as if the decision had already been made. Marcus glanced down at the briefcase, now touching the edge of his seat. Then he looked up again. Still calm. Still silent. And still not moving. Across the aisle, the woman filming whispered quietly to her phone. This is going to blow up online. And she wasn't wrong. Because in just a few minutes, everyone on that plane would realize they had made a very expensive mistake. The cabin had grown noticeably quieter. Not the peaceful quiet from earlier, the kind filled with soft conversations and the rustle of newspapers. This was a different kind of silence. The kind that settles in when everyone senses something uncomfortable unfolding, but no one is quite sure how it will end. Marcus Carter still sat in seat 2A. Calm. Unmoved. Across from him, the older businessman, Richard Coleman, had now placed his leather briefcase fully onto the armrest, his body angled toward the seat as if he already owned it. Look, Richard said, glancing around at the nearby passengers. We don't need to make this a whole scene. His voice carried the tone of someone used to getting his way. He pointed lightly at Marcus. But the man is clearly in the wrong seat. A few heads nodded uncertainly. The senior flight attendant, Lisa, folded her arms. She had the confident posture of someone who believed the situation was already resolved. Sir, she said firmly to Marcus, we've asked you politely several times. Marcus didn't answer right away. Instead, he adjusted the cuff of his burgundy suit jacket with slow precision. The gesture was small, but deliberate, like a man with absolutely no intention of rushing. Have you checked the passenger manifest yet? Marcus asked quietly. Lisa exhaled through her nose. No, she replied flatly, because I don't need to. Richard chuckled again. That's exactly right, he said. You can tell just by looking. The comment hung in the air longer than he probably intended. A few passengers shifted in their seats. Across the aisle, the woman filming lifted her phone slightly higher. Wow, she whispered under her breath. Behind the first row, Maya was still standing near the galley curtain. Her stomach tightened, because she knew something the others didn't. She had seen the boarding scan. Seat 2A. Passenger, confirmed. Name Marcus Carter. Her fingers curled around the edge of the service counter. Lisa Maya tried again, a little more firmly this time. Lisa turned clearly annoyed. What now? I really think we should just double-check the system, Maya said. It would take 2 seconds. Lisa didn't even glance toward the tablet mounted near the galley. Instead, she shook her head. This isn't complicated. Then she lowered her voice slightly, though not enough to keep nearby passengers from hearing. We both know first-class passengers don't usually show up like that. Maya blinked. She followed Lisa's gaze toward Marcus. The suit, the briefcase, the calm expression. Nothing about him looked out of place. Except, apparently, to the people judging him. Up front, Richard was growing impatient. He tugged lightly on the armrest. Listen, he said, now addressing Marcus directly. My meeting starts the moment we land in Los Angeles. So if you could just be reasonable and move, we can all get on with our day? Marcus slowly leaned back into the seat.
Still composed. Still silent. Then he looked up at Richard.
And for the first time since the confrontation began, he spoke more than a single sentence. You seem very certain this seat belongs to you, Marcus said. Richard smiled. Because it does. Marcus nodded once, almost thoughtfully. Then his gaze shifted to the flight attendant standing beside him. Lisa. And his voice remained calm as he said the words that would soon unravel everything inside that cabin. Then it shouldn't be a problem to check the system. The plane remained parked at the gate, the engines still humming softly. But what no one in that first-class cabin realized yet was that the real turbulence hadn't even started. The silence after Marcus's words lingered for a moment. Not long, but long enough that a few people in the first-class cabin began shifting in their seats. Because what he had said was simple. Reasonable, even. Just check the system. But for some reason, no one seemed willing to do it. Lisa, the senior flight attendant, stared at Marcus for a second, as if deciding whether his calm tone annoyed her more than his refusal to move. Then she let out a short breath.
Sir, she said, her patience clearly thinning, this isn't a debate.
She gestured toward Richard Coleman. This passenger has already confirmed this seat is his. Richard gave a small nod as if approving her decision. You see, he said, spreading his hands slightly, this really shouldn't be complicated. He leaned closer to Marcus, lowering his voice just enough to sound condescending instead of loud. Look, my friend, Richard said sometimes mistakes happen. You probably just walked into the wrong cabin. A few passengers nearby exchanged glances. Marcus remained still. Not defensive. Not embarrassed. Just observant. Richard continued, now speaking a little louder again. So why don't you head back to your actual seat before we delay the entire flight? The comment earned a quiet chuckle from someone a few rows back. But not everyone was amused. Across the aisle, the woman filming kept her phone steady, whispering softly. This is getting worse. Behind them, Maya's concern had grown into something heavier. Doubt. because the more she listened to the conversation, the more certain she became that the situation had been handled completely wrong. She glanced again toward the tablet mounted near the galley wall. The passenger manifest was right there. One tap. That was all it would take. But Lisa wasn't moving toward it. Instead, she took a step closer to Marcus's seat. Her voice dropped slightly. "This is your final request," she said. "If you refuse to move, we will have to involve the captain." That word changed the atmosphere immediately. "Captain!" Several passengers straightened. Because once the cockpit became involved, the situation was no longer just awkward. It became official. Marcus slowly folded his hands together over his briefcase. His expression hadn't changed, but his eyes moved briefly toward the cabin ceiling, almost as if he were counting something silently in his head. Then he looked back at Lisa. "Before you do that," Marcus said calmly, "I'm giving you one more chance." Lisa blinked. "Chance," she repeated. Marcus nodded once. "Yes." His voice remained steady. "Check the system." Richard rolled his eyes dramatically. "Oh, come on," he said. "You're still doing this?" He turned toward Lisa with a dismissive wave. "You don't need a computer to see what's going on here." Then he glanced back down at Marcus. And that was when he made the comment that pushed the entire situation past the point of simple misunderstanding. "You can tell just by looking," Richard said. The cabin went still. Even the quiet engine hum seemed to fade for a moment, because everyone heard exactly what he meant. Marcus didn't react right away. He simply watched Richard, studied him. Then Marcus leaned forward slightly in his seat. And for the first time since the confrontation had begun, there was the faintest shift in his tone. Not anger. Not yet. But something sharper. "Interesting," Marcus said quietly. Then he reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out his phone. Marcus held the phone in his hand for a moment before doing anything. Not rushed. Not dramatic. Just deliberate. Across the aisle, the woman recording leaned slightly forward, trying to catch every detail. The faint glow of her screen reflected off the polished armrest. Richard Coleman noticed the phone too. He laughed. "Oh, now we're calling someone?" he said loudly, glancing around the cabin. "What is this, your lawyer?" A couple of passengers chuckled awkwardly. Lisa folded her arms again, clearly unimpressed. "Sir," she said, firmly, "making phone calls isn't going to change the situation." Marcus didn't respond. He simply unlocked the screen. For a second, the soft blue light illuminated his calm expression. Then he tapped a single contact. The phone rang once. Twice. Richard leaned closer, smirking. "This should be good." Across the aisle, the woman filming whispered quietly, "Please answer on the third ring someone picked up." Marcus lifted the phone to his ear. "Rachel," he said calmly. The name meant nothing to anyone else in the cabin. But his tone changed slightly. More precise. More businesslike. "Yes," Marcus continued. "I'm on flight 247 to Los Angeles." He paused. His eyes drifted briefly toward the flight attendant standing beside him. "We've run into a situation." Lisa rolled her eyes. "Oh, for heaven's sake," she muttered under her breath. Richard shook his head. "You're really dragging this out." Marcus ignored both of them. First class, he continued into the phone. "Seat 2A. Another short pause. Then Marcus said something that made Maya's attention sharpen instantly. "I need you to document what's happening." Across the aisle, the woman filming mouthed the words silently. "Document." The tension in the cabin shifted again. Rachel's voice was faint through the speaker, but those closest could hear just enough to know the call was very real. Marcus nodded slightly. "Yes," he said. The cabin crew refused to check the passenger manifest. Lisa scoffed. "Because we don't need to." Marcus continued speaking calmly as if she hadn't said anything. "There are multiple witnesses," he added. and at least 2 passengers recording. Richard's smile faded slightly. He glanced around the cabin, now noticing for the first time just how many phones were pointed toward the aisle. Marcus listened for a moment. Then he replied quietly, "Yes, that's correct." Another pause. Then Marcus said something that made Maya's stomach tighten. "Go ahead and notify the legal team." Richard blinked. "Legal team," he repeated. Marcus finally lowered the phone slightly, meeting Richard's eyes. His expression was still calm, still controlled. But there was something different in his gaze now. Something colder. "Just preparing for what comes next," Marcus said. Lisa scoffed again. "You're seriously threatening legal action over a seat?" Marcus slipped the phone back to his ear. "No," he replied calmly. Then he spoke the sentence that would soon change everything inside that aircraft. "Not over a seat." A brief pause. Over what happened because of it. The words "legal team" hung in the air longer than anyone expected. For a moment, the first-class cabin felt strangely still. Not because people believed Marcus, but because something about the way he said it didn't sound like a bluff. Lisa was the first to break the silence. "Oh, she said with a dismissive laugh. "You're calling lawyers now." Her voice carried just enough sarcasm to make a few passengers smirk again. "But not everyone." Across the aisle, the woman filming kept her phone steady, whispering softly, "Something about this guy doesn't look worried." And she was right. Marcus Carter did not look worried. He didn't look embarrassed either. He simply ended the call and placed the phone carefully on top of his briefcase, like a man setting down a chess piece before the next move. Lisa shook her head. "This is ridiculous," she said, turning slightly toward the galley. "I'm getting the captain." That sentence shifted the atmosphere again, because once the captain stepped into the situation, the authority on the plane changed. Lisa reached for the interphone mounted beside the service counter.
Behind her, Maya felt a knot tighten in her stomach.
Because the entire situation could still be fixed. One simple tap. One quick look at the passenger manifest.
She glanced again toward the tablet mounted on the wall.
Still untouched. Still showing the boarding list.
Seat 2A.
Marcus Carter. Confirmed. Maya took a small step forward. "Lisa," she said quietly. Lisa didn't even turn around. "What I really think, not now, Maya." The interruption was sharp, embarrassing. A few passengers heard it. Maya hesitated, then fell silent again. Up front, Richard Coleman had now fully claimed the aisle space beside Marcus's seat. He leaned casually against the armrest, shaking his head as if watching a slow comedy. "You know," Richard said, glancing down at Marcus, "most people would just admitted the mistake by now." Marcus looked up at him. "Unbothered," Richard continued. "But I suppose confidence can take you a long way, even when you're wrong." Another passenger behind them whispered something under his breath. "Dude just won't move." Lisa pressed the interphone button. "Captain, could you come to first class for a moment?" she said. Her tone was calm, professional, but underneath it was a clear message. There was a problem. The call ended. The cabin waited. A few seconds passed. Then 10. The engines outside hummed steadily, the aircraft still parked at the gate. No pushback yet. No taxi clearance. Just a quiet cabin full of passengers watching the unfolding standoff. Marcus glanced briefly toward the window again. The runway lights still shimmered in the distance. Then he turned back toward the aisle. Richard was still standing there. Still confident. Still certain he was right. Marcus studied him for a moment. Then he spoke again. Not loudly, but clearly enough for everyone in the row to hear. "You seem very sure about this seat," Marcus said. Richard smiled. "Absolutely." Marcus nodded slowly. "Good. Good." He rested one hand lightly on the armrest beside him. "Because in about 2 minutes," Marcus said calmly, "the captain is going to check the same system I asked you to check." His eyes moved briefly toward Lisa. And when he does, Marcus paused. The faintest hint of something crossed his expression. Not anger. Not satisfaction. Just certainty. This conversation is going to look very different. The wait for the captain felt longer than it actually was. In reality, it had only been about 30 seconds. But inside the first-class cabin, those seconds stretched. Every passenger in the front rows had now turned their attention toward seat 2A. Even the quiet hum of the aircraft seemed louder somehow. Lisa stood near the aisle, arms folded, her posture rigid with authority. She was clearly confident the situation would end the moment the captain arrived. Beside her, Richard Coleman checked his watch. He sighed dramatically. "You know," Richard said, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear, "this is exactly why flights get delayed." He glanced down at Marcus again. One person refuses to admit a mistake, and now the entire plane has to wait. Marcus didn't respond. He simply rested his hands on the leather briefcase in his lap. Still calm. Still patient. Across the aisle, the woman filming whispered again. "This guy hasn't raised his voice once." Behind her, another passenger leaned forward slightly. "Yeah," he murmured. "That's the weird part." Near the galley, Maya watched everything carefully. Her eyes moved from Marcus to Richard to the tablet still mounted on the wall. Seat 2A. Marcus Carter. Confirmed. The information had been there the entire time. Yet somehow no one in charge had bothered to look. Footsteps suddenly approached from the direction of the cockpit. Heavy. Measured. The curtain near the galley shifted slightly as someone stepped through. Captain Daniel Harper. Mid-50s. Tall. Calm presence. The kind of man used to walking into tense situations at 30,000 feet. Though this time the plane hadn't even left the ground. "What's going on up here?" the captain asked, his voice steady. Lisa stepped forward immediately. "Captain, we have a passenger refusing to vacate a seat that doesn't belong to him." Richard nodded firmly. "That's correct." The captain's eyes moved to Marcus. Marcus met his gaze without hesitation. "Sir," the captain said evenly, "is that accurate?" Marcus leaned back slightly. "Only if someone checked the system," he replied calmly. Lisa scoffed. "We don't need." The captain raised one hand gently. "Let's verify before we go further." The room went quiet again, because that was the moment everything could finally be confirmed. Captain Harper turned toward the tablet mounted near the galley wall. One tap. That was all it took to open the passenger manifest. Behind him, Richard folded his arms with complete confidence. Lisa stood beside him, equally certain. Marcus watched quietly from seat 2A. The captain scrolled once, then stopped. His eyes narrowed slightly as he read the screen. For a brief second, no one spoke. The cabin held its breath. Then the captain slowly turned back toward the aisle. And his expression had changed. Not confused, not uncertain, but suddenly very serious. Captain Harper looked at the screen for another second. Then he looked again. The silence in the cabin had become absolute. Behind him, Richard Coleman shifted his weight slightly, clearly expecting the captain to confirm what everyone else had assumed. "Well," Richard said, impatience creeping into his voice. Lisa leaned forward a little. "Yes, Captain," she added. "As we explained this, passenger is occupying a seat that Lisa..." The captain's voice was calm, but it stopped her sentence immediately. He turned fully toward the aisle, now the tablet still glowing behind him. His expression had changed in a way that several passengers noticed instantly. More careful. More serious. "Can you explain something to me?" the captain asked. Lisa blinked. "Of course." Captain Harper gestured briefly toward the tablet. "Did anyone check the passenger manifest before asking this gentleman to move?" Lisa hesitated for the first time. "Well, we didn't need to." "The other passenger, the system confirms seat 2A," the captain interrupted gently. He turned his gaze toward Marcus. "Is assigned to Mr. Marcus Carter." The words landed in the cabin like a sudden drop in altitude. For a moment, no one moved. Richard's confident expression faltered. Wait, he said. That can't be right. The captain didn't respond immediately. Instead, he tapped the tablet once more, turning the screen slightly so the crew could see it. Passenger manifest. Seat 2A. Marcus Carter confirmed. Lisa's face drained of color. That must be a mistake, Richard said quickly. My ticket clearly says first class. The captain nodded. It does, he replied. Then he scrolled once more. Seat 3C. Richard blinked. 3. What 3? See, the captain repeated calmly. A quiet ripple of whispers spread through the cabin. Across the aisle, the woman filming whispered excitedly. Oh my God, behind her, someone muttered. He was right. Richard's confidence was fading fast now. That's impossible, he said. I've been sitting in 2A on this route for years. Captain Harper remained calm. Tonight, he said, you're in 3C. Richard looked from the tablet to Lisa, to Marcus. His earlier smile was gone. Marcus hadn't moved, hadn't celebrated, hadn't even changed his posture. He simply sat there, quiet, composed, exactly where he had been the entire time. The captain turned slightly toward Lisa again. Before we go any further, he said, I need to understand something. Lisa swallowed. Yes, Captain, his voice stayed measured. When Mr. Carter told you to check the system, the captain paused. His eyes moved briefly around the cabin, noticing several passengers still holding their phones up. Why didn't you, Lisa, didn't answer right away? For the first time since the confrontation had started, the senior flight attendant looked uncertain. Her eyes flicked briefly toward Richard. Then back to the captain. Well, the other passenger insisted the seat was his, she said, her voice no longer as confident as before. Captain Harper watched her quietly. That's not what I asked, he replied. The tension in the cabin grew thicker. Several passengers were now openly holding their phones up, recording the moment. Across the aisle, the woman filming whispered again. This just flipped. Lisa shifted slightly in the aisle. We were trying to resolve the situation quickly, she said. Marcus remained seated in 2, listening but not interrupting. The captain nodded slowly. I understand that, he said. Then he gestured again toward the tablet. But the system has been here the entire time. No one spoke. Richard suddenly cleared his throat. Well, he said quickly, forcing a smile that no longer looked convincing. If there's been a misunderstanding, we can just fix it. His earlier confidence had vanished. He grabbed his briefcase from the armrest. I'll take 3C. No problem. The whispering in the cabin grew louder now, because everyone had watched the entire confrontation unfold. Everyone had heard the comments. Everyone had seen Marcus remain calm while being told he didn't belong. Captain Harper's eyes moved briefly across the cabin. He noticed the phones, the recording lights, the quiet tension. Then he looked back at Richard. Yes, the captain said calmly. You will. Richard forced a small laugh. Right. Exactly. But the captain didn't move aside to let him pass yet. Instead, his attention shifted to Marcus. Mr. Carter, Captain Harper said respectfully, I apologize for the confusion. Marcus looked up at him. His expression remained composed. No confusion on my end, Marcus replied. Several passengers reacted quietly to that line. Because it was true. He had been clear from the start. Check the system. The captain nodded once. Then his eyes returned to Lisa. Lisa, he said, his voice now firmer. Yes, Captain, before this aircraft leaves the gate, he said, I need to understand exactly what happened here. Lisa's posture stiffened again. It was just a seat dispute. Marcus finally leaned forward slightly, and for the first time since the captain arrived, he spoke directly into the tension filling the cabin. It wasn't just a seat dispute. Every conversation in the first-class section stopped. Marcus's voice remained calm, measured, but now there was weight behind it. Your crew refused to verify the system, he said. His eyes moved briefly toward Richard, and they were very comfortable deciding who belonged in this cabin without checking. The words hung in the air, and the captain understood immediately. This wasn't just about seat 2A anymore. Not even close. The cabin fell quiet again after Marcus spoke. Not the awkward silence from earlier. This one was heavier, because now everyone understood what he meant. Captain Harper looked at Marcus, carefully studying the calm certainty in his voice. Then the captain nodded slightly. "I see," he said. Across the aisle, the woman filming whispered again, "This is about more than the seat." Several passengers nearby murmured in agreement, because they had heard Richard's earlier comment. They had heard the tone. They had seen how quickly the crew believed one passenger over another without checking anything. Lisa shifted in place. Her confidence was gone now, replaced by something closer to unease. "Captain," she said quickly, "we were just trying to keep the situation under control." Marcus didn't interrupt. The captain looked at her for a moment. Then he asked quietly, "Did Mr. Carter raise his voice?" Lisa hesitated. No. Did he refuse to show his boarding pass? No. The captain nodded once more, and yet he was told to move. Lisa said nothing. Richard tried to step in again, clearly hoping to end the situation before it became worse. "Look, Captain," he said quickly. "Like I said earlier, we can all move on from this. I'll take my seat and we can depart." But the captain didn't look at him. Instead, his attention remained on Marcus. "Mr. Carter," Captain Harper said respectfully again, "I apologize for the way this was handled." Marcus nodded slightly. "I appreciate that."
Then he leaned forward just a little.
The movement was small, but everyone in the nearby rows noticed it, because something about the moment had shifted again. Marcus picked up his phone from the top of his briefcase. The screen was still lit.
The call with Rachel hadn't ended.
He lifted the phone back to his ear. "Yes," Marcus said calmly. A pause. "They've confirmed the manifest." Several passengers exchanged looks. Richard's brow furrowed. Marcus listened for another moment. Then he spoke again. "No, the captain has it under control now." Another pause. Marcus's gaze moved slowly across the cabin. The recording phones. The uneasy crew. Richard standing awkwardly beside the seat he had insisted was his. Then Marcus said the sentence that made Captain Harper look at him differently. "Yes," Marcus said into the phone. "Go ahead and inform the airline's executive office." A brief silence followed. Marcus continued. "Tell them Marcus Carter is currently sitting in seat 2A. The words Marcus Carter seemed to echo through the first-class cabin, not because Marcus had raised his voice, but because the name landed with a kind of quiet weight. On the other end of the phone, Rachel spoke quickly. Marcus listened for a moment, then gave a short nod. "Yes," he said calmly. "That's correct." A pause. Then Marcus lowered the phone slightly and ended the call. The cabin remained silent. Captain Harper was the first person to speak. "Mr. Carter," the captain said slowly, as if confirming something in his mind. Marcus met his eyes. "That's right." The captain straightened almost instantly. A subtle shift in posture, but noticeable to anyone watching closely, because the name suddenly meant something. A lot, actually. Richard looked between them, confused. "Wait," he said. "What's going on?" The captain didn't answer him immediately. Instead, he looked back toward Marcus. "Carter Global," the captain asked carefully. Marcus nodded once. "Yes, Cess." Across the aisle, the woman filming gasped quietly. "Oh my God," the whisper spread faster than turbulence.
Several passengers leaned toward each other.
Did he just say Carter, the tech guy, because Marcus Carter wasn't just another business traveler? He was the founder of Carter Global Technologies, a company that had grown from a small cybersecurity startup into a multi-billion-dollar enterprise in less than a decade. And more importantly for this moment, Carter Global held a massive investment stake in the airline currently sitting on the runway. Richard's face drained of color. You've got to be kidding me, he muttered. Lisa looked completely frozen, because she suddenly understood something the captain had already realized. The man she had repeatedly told to leave first class was one of the airline's most powerful investors. Marcus remained seated exactly where he had been the entire time. Calm. Composed. Watching the realization spread across the cabin. Captain Harper cleared his throat. Mr. Carter, he said carefully, I had no idea you were on this flight. Marcus gave a small shrug. That was the point. The captain nodded slowly, because now everything made sense. The calmness, the phone call, the legal documentation. This hadn't been a random passenger dispute. It had been a test, and several people in that cabin had just failed it. Marcus leaned back slightly in his seat again. Then he looked at Lisa, not with anger, but with the quiet certainty of someone who already knew what would happen next. You didn't check the system, Marcus said. A beat of silence followed. And you didn't think you needed to. The cabin stayed silent after Marcus spoke. Lisa looked down briefly, unable to meet his eyes. The confidence she had carried earlier was gone. Around them, several passengers were still recording. The quiet hum of phones capturing the moment filled the space that no one else seemed willing to break. Captain Harper finally stepped forward. Lisa, he said calmly, please escort Mr. Coleman to seat 3C. Richard didn't argue this time. He grabbed his briefcase quickly and moved down the aisle, avoiding the eyes of the passengers who had watched everything unfold. Marcus remained seated in 2A, exactly where he had been the entire time. The captain turned back to him. Mr. Carter, he said carefully, this situation will be reported to corporate immediately. Marcus gave a small nod. I'm sure it will. Then he looked once around the cabin at the witnesses, the cameras, and the crew who had judged him too quickly. His voice remained calm. The problem wasn't the seat, Marcus said. A quiet pause followed. It was how easily you decided I didn't belong in it. No one in that cabin had an answer for that.